Hey, I'm Jesse. Let's have a devotion. We are continuing in Exodus chapter 19, and we're going to do verses 20 through 22. Here's the text. The Lord came down on Mount Sinai at the top of the mountain. Just pause for a minute right there. He came down to the top of the mountain. Let that sink in for a minute. We look up at mountains just outside of this car shop. There's a view of the summit, the central summit. There are 6 summits of Tiger Mountain. You have to look up, even from here, to the summit of a relatively small mountain. Tiger Mountain's not that big, but big enough to be named. And we have to look up at it. And there are parts so steep that you'll crane your neck to look at the summit. And this is Mount Sinai, and the Lord comes down to the top of it. Look at how holy and above us he is. Then the Lord summoned Moses to the top of the mountain, and he went up. I don't feel like I'm grasping at straws here. It's just in the text, and it's so clear. God comes down to the top of the mountain, and then the Lord summoned Moses to the top of the mountain, so Moses has to go up. God has to come down to meet with man. Man has to go up to encounter God. This does not speak to a self-redeeming, legalistic faith. Christianity is not a self-help system. Rather, it means you're dead in your sin, and only by the Holy Spirit breathing life into you can you come to life again. But it does indicate, this passage does clearly teach, just through its spatial relationship with God, that latitudinal differentiation, that God is so far above us, he has to come down to our mountain summits. And we're so far below him that upon his summoning, we have to ascend a mountain. This frames for me critiques of God. Okay, this reframes critiques of God. Who are we? All right, the sinful, depraved ones beneath God to leverage critiques in his direction. It's fatuous. And who is God to judge us? He's the one true God. It's absolutely accurate. It's absolutely holy, righteous, and good. When I majored in music, there were a lot of musical snobs, and I don't mean that they would have a negative opinion about certain bands that were bad. Just listen to the Shags with 2 G's. All right, it's true. I think objectively there is such thing as bad music, even though I think Kurt Cobain said that the Shags was like his favorite band, and Frank Zappa said it was like his 3rd favorite album of all time. Fascinating story, but beside the point. These music majors would sometimes diss popular artists, and I get it. There's some pop music, especially when I was in college, that was really bad. I feel like pop music's getting better, all in all. But I always scratch my head when, we music majors would knock on people who were selling, triple platinum records, because it's hard to write a number 1 song, man. If it's so easy, just go do it, and then you won't have student loan debt to major in music. I found myself saying that a lot to my classmates. I'd be like, bro, we're college sophomores. We voted maybe twice. We don't really know much yet. But nonetheless, that was our thinking. And it was always funny how people who were unsuccessful in music or hadn't done anything in music yet were very, very critical of people who had multiple yachts because their music was so widely beloved. And so, I get it. Sometimes musicians will make music just for us, music just for musicians. That's what prog rock is, progressive rock. That's kind of what Dream Theater is. Rush was sort of a prog rock band, arguably. And they had some mainstream success, but really and truly, if you're gonna knock on someone like that, at least have some modicum of success first. So just reframe how fatuous it is for humans to knock on God, who has to come down to a mountain summit that we have to ascend if we're summoned. The Lord directed Moses, "Go down and warn the people not to break through to see the Lord. Otherwise, many of them will die." So you've got that barrier where people want to bust through just to be in proximity to God. They need to be warned. If you do that, you're going to die. And is that because God hates them and he's going to zap them? No, it's because he's holy and we have sin. And what God is in the process of building here is the foundation for atonement. He's about to lay the groundwork for the cross of Jesus in the future. He's going to give us the law, and by it we know morality. This is revelational epistemology. Everything that we believe is about to be given to us by the one who knows absolutely everything. He's going to define and write with his very finger in stone, twice in fact, what is good, what is bad. And he's going to show it to us. But because we've already violated those laws, we're sinful. And because he's holy, it's for our own good that we ought not go there. Verse 22, even the priests who come near the Lord must consecrate themselves, or the Lord will break out in anger against them. Right? Why is he more like delicate on the people, like warning the people not to break through and telling, but he's going to be angry with the priests if they bust through? It's because the priests ought to know better. If you're a Levite, you know this is your whole world. Okay, the Levites were separated from everybody else. They didn't even have an allocation in the promised land. Their portion was the Lord. Their provision was in the temple. And then as we saw in our study of Joshua, these places of worship that were set up throughout the promised land. So why is it that according to Exodus 33:20, you cannot see my face, for humans cannot see me and live? Why can't humans see the face of God and survive that encounter? All the more curious is the fact that God used to talk to mankind. He spoke directly with Adam and Eve. And this is seldom taught in my experience. He talked to their kids. He talked to Cain. He talked to Cain after Cain killed Abel. Cain, the world's first murderer, had a conversation with God and survived. Look at Genesis chapter 4, verse 10. Then he said, "What have you done?" God asks Cain. "Your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. So now you are cursed, alienated from the ground that opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood you have shed. If you work the ground, it will never again give you its yield. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth." But Cain answered the Lord, "My punishment is too great to bear. Since you are banishing me today from the face of the earth, I must hide from your presence and become a restless wanderer on the earth. Whoever finds me will kill me." So Cain is instantly aware of the fact that he must no longer be in the presence of God. Sin has already entered the picture here because of Cain's parents. But this distancing of God from humanity was not instantaneous upon original sin. We see that it's gradual into the second generation. And he knows that I have to hide from the presence of God because of my sin. Moreover, look at the nature of his fear. He's afraid that whoever finds him will do to him what he did to Abel. So his plea is for mercy, even as he's been called out. And look at the merciful reply of God. In that case, whoever kills Cain will suffer vengeance 7 times over. This is just pure mercy. God's initial decree upon Cain was absolutely just. Cain cried out to God and said, "This punishment is too much." And so God actually orders protection over Cain. And he placed a mark on Cain so that whoever found him would not kill him. Then Cain went out from the Lord's presence and lived in the land of Nod, east of Eden. These 2 verses are seldom taught, and I think that's why people have a lot of questions to ask about the nature of incest in the initial generations of humanity. He placed a mark on Cain so that whoever found him, see that he was even worried about whoever's going to find him in verse 14, and then it's stipulated in verse 15 that whoever finds him won't kill him because he's marked by God. Who's worried about finding him? And moreover, we see this, the land of Nod. In my doctoral dissertation, I had to go before this jury of professors, and one of them believed this, that God created Adam and Eve, and they were the first humans, and then He created more people too. We just have the account of Adam and Eve as the first humans. I'm not sure that that's accurate. Rather, what I believe is through progressive revelation, God later gives commands against incest, but at this point, He has yet to give that command. They're also genetically perfect upon creation. Right? Adam and Eve were genetically perfect. So the result is that we as humans are in a sad state because we are God's beloved creation, and we're the only part of creation that's made in His image, male and female. He created us in His image. See Genesis 1, is it 27, 28? And He loves us, but we've fallen from Him. And now to be in His presence is deadly for us. This is why the Israelites have to stay back as God comes down on Mount Sinai. This is why even the priests have to be consecrated before God comes in their proximity. He's just coming to the top of the mountain there at the base of. Moses alone is going up because he's been summoned by God. And so we see that God does mitigate His presence to spare Moses' life, but not without some pretty cool side effects, as we've seen in the sermon. His face is radiant. Be radiant. Let your face glow because you've encountered God. And we see as well just the sheer mercy that God showed the world's first murderer, Cain. He was so merciful to Cain because Cain was afraid of what would frankly have been fair treatment. And as a result, Cain survives this encounter with God, but that's the last time we see Cain and God talk. So in some sense, Cain's fear was true and accurate. I have to hide from your presence because I'm sinful and you're holy and I'll die. And what Cain was afraid of more than anything was dying. He was afraid of experiencing what he put Abel through in the first place. And God just had mercy on him. So out of God's mercy, He mitigates the severity of His presence. As you see with Moses' encounter with God on Mount Sinai, he's not in the direct presence of God. God places His hand over Moses and passes by. And the only thing that Moses actually sees is the train of God's robe. That which Isaiah, as we saw in Holy Dissident, or studying the book of Isaiah, saw in this vision of the throne room of God. So there's this separation. It's sin on our part. It's not God's fault. It's 100% ours. God is omniscient, which means He has absolute foreknowledge, because if He doesn't have absolute foreknowledge, He's not omniscient. But because He's omniscient, He knew about the fall. He knew about Adam and Eve. He knew about every murder that would ever take place. And He still chose to create humanity. In fact, He created time itself, knowing every second that would transpire. He's the Alpha and He's the Omega. He's the beginning and the end. So why? All right, to answer Epicurus' question, to weigh in on an issue of theodicy from the Bible, I believe that this biblical precedent with the people of God encountering Him out Mount Sinai, finding His very direct presence deadly, I believe that one of the answers to the question of theodicy is about the holiness of God and the sinfulness of man, the foreknowledge of God, knowing everything that man would do and still choosing to create them. Why? It's because God knew Cain would do this. God knew every sin that would ever be committed. And He also knew the ending. Here's the ending. Spoiler, universe. Revelation 21:3, then I heard a loud voice from the throne. Look, God's dwelling is with humanity, and He will live with them. They will be His peoples, and God Himself will be with them and be their God. This is the second to last chapter of the whole Bible. And so it ends as it began, but better, because this is a permanent, eternal state. God's dwelling is with humanity. He will live with them. They will be His peoples, people from every tribe, nation, language, and tongue together. God Himself will be with them and will be their God. This lasts forever. The sin of Cain lasted only for the duration of Cain's life. And even then he was marked by God and shown mercy. Look at the mercy of God. In his holiness, he's also incredibly, incredibly, unfathomably merciful. He's so patient with us. Now, as we saw in a sermon a couple of weeks ago, we ought not test that patience because he does discipline his people. We don't test God. God tests us. But look at the holiness of God and the mercy of God. Look at how God uses all of redemptive history. We'll all experience Eden, but better. And we'll experience it forever. The whole history of the earth, magnified 1 trillion times over, does not constitute 1/1000th of 1% of the time all things will be perfect. I would call this a comparative analysis chronologically, but there is no comparison because it's infinity versus any number at all. There is no comparison. So God knows Cain's going to murder Abel. God knows he's going to have to come down to Mount Sinai to lay this foundation for the law that every man would fall short of, and that atonement in blood would have to be made, and that he would make it himself as Christ goes to the cross and resurrects. Knowing every sin, knowing how he would redeem, knowing the permanent state of eternity future, God knew that it was better to create we sinful men than it was to not create we sinful men, because the ending is actually better than the beginning.